up in arms. That hasn't happened in this country for such a long period of time. Do you realize that college students back in the 1870s, when they got seriously annoyed with the administration, would frequently turn the cannon on the commons around and load it and fire a round through the president's house?
I didn't know that.
Well, that was once upon a time fairly common in terms of collegiate discussion between administration and student body. The forms of communication have deteriorated through time. I mean, I remember them shooting at us like a bunch of bloody pigeons in the 60s and the 70s. I don't recall us ever having shot at them. And it's really ironic because according to Jefferson, he said that, that the tree of liberty is very important, and it requires that it be watered.
Blood of patriots and tyrants alike.
It must be watered by the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure.
Well, I think that would be an interesting topic for discussion as to why people are not
Why are we intra-punitive instead of extra-punitive? Why is it we commit suicide instead of taking some SOB with us? Why is it we don't have the cancer commandos who, if you're going to go, why don't you take the CEO of the company that gave it to you?
These are good times.
Yeah.
Well, why do you think that is? Do you think
Because we have turned into a bunch of absolute brainwashed garden slugs.
Or people are just kept so
Thank you.
busy, or that they don't have the energy left to...
Everybody still owns a television set.
There's some truth to that.
Yeah, all these reasons, the education,
It's not mellow, it's just not mellow.
Well, the proposition, that's one of the real ironies, because in many cases, it seems to me, we're replicating the 30s now in ways that I find real discomforting. We now have essentially a Supreme Court, whether this Afro-Aryan crypto-Nazi gets confirmed or not, is really a trivial issue. They've already got an absolute juggernaut on the Supreme Court that will in fact overturn any and all aspects of due process, the Bill of Rights, the concept of privacy, the proposition that the state ought to get its bloody nose out of people's private lives is being absolutely eradicated. In fact, the new crime bill that the fasciste in the Congress have cooked up is in fact going to make capital punishment universal throughout the United States, independent of state law. In fact, they can prosecute people under federal law for a crime within a state and supersede state law, even though the state has a specific prohibition against capital punishment. They've added 50 new capital crimes to the statute books. The thing is, we are rolling back very rapidly into what I consider a whole new dark age that's going to go past where Adolf Hitler intended to go, because I think this is a fundamental attack on the Enlightenment itself. I think that we are now going into a paradigm that has really not existed since the 14th century. And I do not view it with great enthusiasm, precisely because we now have no checks and no balances. We have a Supreme Court that is, if anything, the spear point of autocratic power of the elite of the state. And that state elite is not only going to own the government, it's going to own the people in sort of a neo-feudalism.
Techno-slavery.
Exactly. For instance, there was a driver for UPS, the place I was today, and he's got this electronic board, and he came trotting up, and I looked at this thing and I said, Jesus criminy, what is that? What happened to the pad and, and pen? And he says, hey, this thing keeps a time log. They now have a computerized clipboard which you sign with a magic pen in this little LCD display window, and everything is literally time counted internally within, you know, the memory of this thing. And so the driver is now essentially a complete slave to this lousy little piece of electronics. Yeah!
Two states are passing legislation to try to control that on workers. It's considered to cause work-related stress. Two states are actually working on controlling it.
And now, you know, hand problems, arm problems, shoulder problems. I know two people right now who, one is using conventional surgery, the other one's using, you know, non-conventional treatment for serious damage to their ability to function. Just, you know, this one friend said she'd reach out and try and pick something up. She couldn't tell if she had it because she couldn't feel it. You know, and so she was dropping things because she couldn't tell how hard she was grabbing it.
RPS, the UPS current adversary, they don't even have to write anything. They have a pen that does the exact same thing. They just rub it across all those barcodes, and they are always running. UPS are still kind of lackadaisical comparatively. RPS doesn't even deal with that big thing. They carry a pen that does the exact same thing. It's a little big, exact same thing.
It's a barcode reader.
RPS, I'm sorry.
What is that?
Rapid Partial Service.
Well, we may have a nation of cripples after how many?
Well, then you have a frontal lobotomy. Why would it bother you if your rest of you goes to hell? You know?
Yeah.
With all this stuff happening, doesn't that make the Bill of Rights a revolutionary document once again?
It would seem to me that if you go back and you look at the preamble to the second Constitution, it says that this Constitution is established in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. It didn't say a damn thing about a $5 million book deal for wealthy generals. It doesn't say promote the welfare of generals. It says promote the general welfare. You know, and secure the blessings of liberty, etc. Now, is that a social contract or isn't it? Is it not a quid pro quo between the people and the government that is what the government is to do? And if it doesn't do that, well then there's what is called a breach of contract.
One of the things that I'm concerned about is that some of us have lived enough decades, you might say, that we remember how things ought to be or used to be, and
We're less like they are now than now.
we remember things that, I have a friend, for example, who's 10 years younger than I am, who hasn't felt the change as much as I have seen it, for example. And then I'm concerned about what about really younger folks, although there are some, I'm sure, who are very aware of this kind of thing. But if they haven't lived in a time when things, for example, I guess I'll bring up, there was a mention about flying on airlines. And some of us were talking about how it used to be, better service, that kind of thing. And a younger person said, well, why should it be any better than that? Why
You
should
mean
we
to
just-
say you used to be able to go into an airport and not go through a metal detector and have everything checked at your body cavities?
Right. And they're saying, well, why should you expect it any better than that? That's the way it is.
Well, what have you got to hide? You want to go to the courthouse, go through the metal detector. And make sure you take your pack of cigarettes out because it'll set off the beeper.
Will it?
Yes.
Oh, remind me
Little bit,
to
yeah.
get some smokes.
So I'm getting concerned about
It's
that
called,
aspect of.
but frogs adjust.
What's better?
People adjust to the level of repression. The proposition that the fact that you got people running around in camouflage suits with automatic weapons shooting people and their dogs hardly raises a ripple. You know, and Chief Potter, you know, does a little aw shucks article in the Oregonian, explains to the Meadow Muffins how they really have a real tight control over the use of deadly force. They only kill people if they need to.
So young
And if
people
they need to kill them, there's no limit to the number of bullets to be fired in pursuit of that straightforward objective. I.e. 32 rounds in one body is not too much.
Into the mentally disturbed woman, you mean?
No, she only got hit, let's see, what was it, 20 times out of 22 rounds.
Wow.
I'm talking about the quote-unquote hardened crack house that these guys in their Rambo outfits went in through the patio door. Boy, if I ever build a fortress, I am going to make damn sure I don't put patio doors on it. Anyway, so 3 of them walked in, and of course, anybody who has, you know, this kind of, it's like out of a movie. You have these weirdos in these, you know, fatigues with machine guns come busting into your house. What is your reaction going to be?
Spots of a drink.
Well, if you got a gun, you're going to reach for it. If you're halfway normal,
Yeah, they didn't announce their entry, they just shot the dogs and bust through the door, right? Didn't that
Yeah.
happen?
5 kids.
They used different weapons to shoot the dogs because they were silenced with.
that's right.
Silenced one.
Yep.
I thought they always had to give people a warning, you know, like, hey, you inside, this is the police, we're surrounding your house.
There was a law that just went down here last spring sometime early that said if the police believe that the people inside are dangerous, they
They
can
don't have
enter
to knock.
unannounced. They
They
can
don't
enter,
have to
it's a
knock.
no-knock, kick the door down.
And do not have to announce. They
And-
are police.
Yeah, and so it's, I mean,
So if you want to start a burglary ring and a robbery ring, get your camouflage duds and your automatic weapons and go around kicking in doors unannounced because you can then pretend to be a cop.
No, no, you do it like the cops did it in Denver in the 60s. You just go in in plain clothes and burglarize the place.
Well, that's if
Oh, and in
if you're not
Seattle,
there to
Seattle
kill
in the
them.
70s. Remember that?
Well,
They'll
in the
reach
case-
right up to the chief of police.
Well, but
Just
yeah, I
plain
do.
clothes there.
But in the case of, say, the Panthers in Chicago, they actually did a systematic assassination because they had a blueprint of the house where people slept. And in fact, Clark, who was the second guy who was killed there?
Hampton? Fred Hampton.
Yeah, Hampton and Clark. They had actual floor plans of where they were sleeping, and they had been administered a dose of heavy-duty downers prior to the operation. So, in fact, they were fundamentally comatose at the time of the attack. Not only were they assassinated, they were drugged prior to the assassination, so they didn't even have a chance to roll over and grab a shotgun and return around. I mean, nothing. They were, I mean, you might as well have hogtied them, drug them out in the middle of the street and shot them in the head. It would not have been any more of a absolute cold-blooded, premeditated homicide.
Yeah, supposedly the guy who was their head of security had put something in their Kool-Aid, is what I heard.
That's right, that's what I'm saying.
That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Well,
Kool-Aid? Remember Jonestown?
yes. Incidentally, you know where Jones got his start?
Fidel Castro, right?
Oh, Jesus. No, Indianapolis, Indiana, head of the Human Rights Commission. Give me a break.
No, I thought it was a joke. I heard Tom Valentine say that. He has
Oh.
to call him.
Oh.
Seminary.
Oh, that was a joke, thank God. But listen, you gotta be real careful with jokes in this field because sometimes it turns out it ain't a joke.
Not funny.
It gets real weird. I mean, some of the connections, I mean, for instance, Harry Martin, the guy who is the editor of the Napa Sentinel, who has been breaking a lot of the stories on CIA drug involvement and whatnot, who's now involved with the story about October Surprise involving Rustbacker. Turns out he, a few years ago, back in the mid-'80s, was working down in Silicon Valley with a magazine called, I think it was Defense Electronics, with a colonel who was subsequently indicted by the U.S. government for organizing arms to Iran, and that was, you know, the whole EDA case, where Martin has got all these connections to all these people who were subsequently indicted in Iran arms smuggling, and now he is no longer, you know, connected with that, but he's off in Napa, you know, and you've got all these funny backdoor connections between all these people, and now, of course, there's all kinds of, you know, other, it gets, that's why it's real hard to make a joke like that without somebody going, oh yeah? Oh yeah?
What I don't understand, the thing that's completely evades me in this country is, I'm sure you've had the same experience I've had, is that we're all kinds of people who used not even to talk to each other. Different kinds of folks are now talking to each other, saying the same thing, and going like
Prouty is
this.
now being advertised, his secret team is now being advertised in the spotlight. Well, Fletcher Prouty is the guy who wrote the secret team about how the CIA places agents in all of the other agencies. Is everybody familiar with the book and the thesis? That, you know, every espionage agency spies on every other espionage agency. I mean, the FBI spies on the CIA and vice versa. Remember the case where the Joint Chiefs of Staff had agents planted in Kissinger's office and in the White House, you know, and they were spying on Kissinger and Nixon, and Nixon was spying on them, and I mean, you have, I mean, everybody's, you know, at least an agent for somebody, and sometimes they're doubling or tripling, and that's basically normal when you get into a society where, in fact, all of the stuff that you learn in school about how the society is supposed to work is complete crap. Absolute, complete, unremitting nonsense. That doesn't make any difference whether you vote or not. They'll stuff the computer for you.
Well,
You don't have a clue what the vote really was. Nobody has any idea other than the people who are controlling the computers.
right.
I mean, they have been stuffing ballot boxes when they were using paper. You don't think they can stuff them when it's electronic?
It's happened here in Multnomah County for years. You know, every election practically, there is a breakdown in the computer, and we have to wait for results until it gets fixed.
Which means until they find out what the count is down county, so they know how much to
you bet.
finesse it.
I guess, pardon me, I kind of digressed there, but I guess what I keep wondering about, Ace, is this. What's going to happen if and when all these different kinds of folks who are now looking at each other and saying, yeah, what a bunch of bourgeois this is that's going on now, ever figure it out and get together?
If that happens, it's going to be a case of serious heartburn for the elite, but I would be willing to bet you at this point that's already occurred to them. They said, what happens if these nutcakes get together? Well, all right, let's set up, you know, 82 different saviors. I mean, we have Lyndon LaRouche who will save us.
What's that?
We have Lyndon LaRouche who will save us. We have the Reverend Sun Young Moon who will save us. We have Elizabeth Clare Prophet who will save us.
Jay Rockefeller says the poor people need help.
John D. Rockefeller III,
Isn't that
yes.
amazing? He actually said that.
Oddly enough, he's right.
He said that.
Well, but so
The
did
people
Jack
in America need
Camp.
help.
But so did
I
Jack
couldn't
Camp.
believe it. I couldn't believe it. He actually said that.
Well, but so does the chairman of Honeywell.
With a straight face, by the way.
They don't, look, you gotta remember, when you have a hereditary aristocracy, the humor gene gets lost.
I couldn't say something funny like that with a straight face, could
Well, but
you?
he could because he doesn't have any humor gene. He does not see the humor in it. I mean, it's like the dumb gene, you know, is dominant, you know, in other people. I mean, that you also have these genes that sort of drop out. The humor gene just goes away in the elite level. Can you imagine what would happen if you had a press conference with the Twisted Shrub and he actually had a humor gene? He would listen to himself and crack up about every other sentence. He would just howl. The man is absolutely hysterically funny if you really listen to him.
Do they really believe they're envious? Are you
Well,
saying
that's my question. I mean, I really can't tell because I think it is what Orwell developed as the idea of doublethink and newspeak, where you always keep the lie one jump ahead of the truth. I mean, George Bush has said that he wants to be the environmental president, the education president, the sweetness and light president, the, what was it, 1,000 points of light, you know, that's you know, a metaphor that is so egregiously pompous and profane coming from him that it's utterly bizarre. It's just simply, you know, that first of all, that came from, wasn't it Peggy Noonan?
Yes, it was.
Yes, I mean, she was the scriptwriter for The Twisted Shrub, the Apostle of the Evil Empire, and before that, Gunga Dan.
She's quite good. She's quite good. She's
Peggy Noonan, however,
She's very
as good as she is still as crazy as the proverbial shithouse rat.
Yeah.
Because she really believes that if you give more to those that already own half of everything that can be owned, it's somehow going to be better for the people who have nothing.
Them who has.
They know how to take care of it.
Yeah, that for instance, they know how to take care of it, like Milton Friedman and his lovely wife, Milty and Rose. They can discuss the issue of what do you do with spare $10,000 rattling around in the, you know, dresser drawer. I mean, do you put it into the stock market? Do you invest it in precious metals? Do you? And he concluded that if you want to buy a diamond, that's what you ought to do, even though you aren't sure of an appreciation that would be consistent with money market funds or T-bills. You have an aesthetic appreciation, which has a validity that has as much import on a spiritual level as the interest would have on a...
Ace? He knows, you know poor folks, he knows rich folks. The people he knows, lots of them, and there are lots and lots of them who have spare 10 grand. So why should that shock you so much?
It only shocks me because I remember Marie Antoinette.
Give them food stamps.
She said,
Let the
well, but
There are a lot of people who have 10 grand lying around, that's the truth.
and if there are any of them here, we're open to contributions to defray the heating, lighting, and other bills.
So you screwed up and you got to know poor people.
There's an old joke about God must have, loved poor people. He made so many of them. The fact is that Marie Antoinette was not being a smartass when she said, "Let them eat cake." She was being a Milton Friedman. She did not understand that there was no bread to eat and there was no cake either. She was judging the world from her frame of reference, which was that if you had no bread, it was because the bakers were busy doing cakes. And when they got through doing the cakes and the pastries and the rolls and the rest of it, then they would go back and bake some bread. It wasn't as though she was being a smartass. She was not being cruel. She was being a Milton Friedman. And when Jack Kemp says that the society cannot survive in a duality of abject poverty and great affluence, he's not whistling Dixie. He is saying what every analyst has said ever since anybody got around to analyzing, that if you have vast disproportionality of wealth, power, status in a society, eventually things get real rocky. Now, Hamilton, who is the most monstrous bastard ever produced in this country, he exceeds in terms of mendacity even the Milton Friedmans. But he was not stupid. And he understood things, and he understood them with great insight. His argument was that you could only rule either by power or by interest. And if you're going to use power, which means force, you have to have a comparatively closed system or it isn't going to work. And his argument for establishing this tripartite pseudo checks and balances system to protect the ruling elite from everybody else, which is like, does everybody know the bit about minority and majority and what that meant at the time of the founding of the Second Republic, and what was this great fear held by Madison and Hamilton and Washington and the others about the majority?
Well, my understanding of that is that there was a conflict between whether their order was more important than justice. Does that run into the same line of thought that you're
Well, it's
describing?
parallel, but there were debtors and there were creditors. The minority were creditors. The majority were debtors. That's why they had to overthrow the First Republic. Because 6 of the 13 state legislatures were under the control of the debtor party.
Wow.
And they passed a bill called a stay law. A stay law was, there will be no foreclosures for failure to make payments upon mortgage, either principal or interest. The creditors were just livid.
Small wonder.
They were just absolutely apoplectic. I mean, this violated the sanctity of contract. Now, what is it the Second Republic did? It established the sanctity of contract. It also provided absolute power of the purse and power of the sword to enforce contract. At the time of the founding of the Second Republic, or the coup d'etat against the First Republic, or the counter-revolution against the First Republic, or if you will, anticipatory fascism as opposed to democracy. I mean, there's a lot of ways of working this out semantically, but basically what it did is it made damn sure the creditors ran it and ran it forever. Because if you look at the way the system is structured, it is impossible for the majority to, with the debtors, to ever achieve power within the national government. Which, in case you're interested, the draft of the Constitution of 1787, before it got to the Committee of Style, every place you find the word federal, you found the word national. It was a national government. The Committee of Style changed one word throughout the document. Where it said national, they changed it to federal, because that sugar-coated the pill, and it went down much better. The purpose was brilliant. Hamilton and Madison just came up with the most brilliant system ever devised to ensure the perpetuity of the rule of that minority that they loved so diligently, the rich, the well-born, the affluent, and the creditors. That is the minority to be protected. And the only minority that has ever been protected in this particular country. If you stop and reflect upon it, what other minority has ever been protected with the diligence and the enthusiasm and the alacrity of the rich and the creditors? Not a single one, I assure you. You can scale through all of the history for 215 years, if you will, and never will you find any minority more jealously protected than the damn creditors. Of course, how is it that someone becomes a creditor? Well, somehow they get that which is produced by others, right? Do you think the Rockefellers make their own income from work? By the sweat of their brow, they go out and wrest wealth from the planet? Good God, what a bizarre proposition. They're born. Yeah.
Even if the rich were to put in 16-hour days, why are they worth $71 million a year? And why is their rate
Because they
worth
said
so
so.
much?
Because
No,
they
but,
said so.
I mean, because some people, maybe they do work. Maybe they're workaholics and they're rich. But the fact
Go to
is.
Acapulco, you can find
Well, I'm not denying that.
millionaires by the...
I'm just saying, isn't it also a matter of why is their labor worth so much and
Because
somebody
they
who
said
works
so.
just as hard? Well, I mean, that's an important point, I think.
Well, but since we live in
Because
an autocracy, the autocrat gets to say what's cool, right?
Okay, but it's true not only of rich. I mean, it's true of, the woman that cleans a building compared to a lawyer that earns $150,000 a year, or a teacher who earns $20,000 and a doctor who earns $200,000. I mean, there's only so much labor a person could put out.
You mean to say that nobody has more than 24 hours a day, no matter how hard they work at it?
Exactly. So why is theirs worth so much time?
Well, because they said so. Again, you're raising an absolutely appropriate question. What is the standard of judgment that would determine that one person, using Iacocca as the example, because his income in 90 was $8,000 an hour. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the full year. Now, $8,000 an hour, that is not a question of did he earn it. There is no way in the world that anybody earns $8,000 an hour in terms of what people earn, say, changing diapers, which to me is fairly onerous occupation, or, working, a garbage route. Or mowing lawns. I mean, there are lots of things. I mean, for instance, if you want the people who I think really do some of the most important work in the country, it's probably the agricultural workers who permit us to eat. I can't think of anything a hell of a lot more important. I mean, first is oxygen, second is water, and third is food on the priority list. And the people who provide food is not, the merchants of grain.
Did anybody see the other evening on TV, they had a segment about a farmer who was probably going to have to fold, and he went to the bank for a loan, and he was denied money. And so then instead, they thought about what they could do. So they decided they were going to print their own, quote, money. It was like coupons or whatever you want to call it. And then they went to customers that they had had, and they said, we will give you this document, this coupon or whatever, and at the end of the summer, you will get your 20 pounds of potatoes. And so they saved their farm that way.
Well, I tell you, if that works more than once, there's going to be a serious case of the government shutting them down, because technically that's right on the borderline of counterfeiting.
No, that's a barter system, that's just.
Look at sell futures.
They're getting real hard on barter systems too.
And they talked about several different businesses that, you know, couldn't get money through those normal channels of bank loans, but who were going out and getting it through people this way, individuals that they knew.
Well-
Things change.
The reason why we're going to have a coup is precisely because we're being driven to extremities. Pat Buchanan is going to have his wet dream. The Supreme Court will in fact show up with swastikas. They will rule poverty a crime, and they will then have a blank check to lock up anybody who does not make $60K a year, and hold them indefinitely on the grounds that if they haven't committed a crime, it's only fortuitous, and probably they've committed several and simply hasn't been caught. The same philosophy my father had used whenever he paddled me and I didn't have it coming, it caught up with me for the times when he should have and didn't.
Just in case I missed one.
Well, I mean, that's sort of a quasi-fascist theory, but if you apply it on a social level, I think we will have a system that is some amalgam of Brave New World, 1984, you know, and half a dozen other utopian visions that are... What? I missed what you said.
I just was another thought here. I agree with you about the agricultural support.
Well, they deserve a whole lot,
Because,
but they don't get it.
no, and more farmers are being put out, and it concerns me, because then what will happen, we should think about this, we would then have co-op or corporate farming, and our food they could charge if they wanted. And I think...
That's the whole purpose of monopoly,
That's
is
right.
to drive any and all possible competition out, because what you develop initially an oligopolistic system where you have a concentration of a few groups operating in collusion. If the antitrust laws that were passed around the turn of the century were enforced today, you would essentially destroy the entire corporate system. If the Sherman and the Clayton Antitrust Acts were actually enforced today, seriously, and not the kind of BS that is being done, but I mean real enforcement, you would virtually destroy the entire corporate system as it exists today, under the existing law. Because, as was mentioned earlier, whenever the law is inconvenient to the elite that rules, they ignore it. I mean, they simply ignore it. Selective law enforcement, you know, as a part of the legal process.
I'm familiar with the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, but not with the Clayton.
Oh dear, I don't have a book in front of me, and I haven't looked it up for years.
1895, Sherman.
1895?
Yeah, Clayton, I don't know.
Well, there were the two that were right about the same time, and they worked in conjunction to try and break up the trusts. And that's what it was called then, was, in fact, Teddy Roosevelt, one of the true all-time humbugs, liars, fools, and general hypocrites, was the one who called himself a trust buster. Well, please remember that we got into the First World War from the guy who was voted in on the peace ticket, Wilson. You know, and if that's too far back in ancient history, remember LBJ, you know, vote for LBJ and save us from war in Vietnam. So we did.
I'm in Goldwater with.
Well, we voted for LBJ to keep us out of war in Vietnam, and boy, oh boy, did he ever.
We were in war, and the U.S. was involved in war in Vietnam, but remember they smeared Goldwater,
Yeah.
because Goldwater said that if he was honest, the damn fool. Yeah, if he were elected
More or
president,
less.
he would bomb Haiphong Harbor near Hanoi. And people said, oh my God, we have to vote for LBJ. We can't have a crazy person like this. And what did LBJ do? One of the first things?
Bomb Haiphong.
Bomb Haiphong Harbor. You betcha.
including some Russian chips. Well, but again, you know, you've got to start integrating this whole body of information. You've got to look at it as a totality and not approach it as discrete, isolated events. I mean, when you wake up in the morning, you've got to wake up with a memory. You know, I mean, the puppies wake up in the morning and they go, you know, golly gee whiz, a whole new world out there, and they just have to go out and run around in circles and investigate everything. I saw a great cartoon the other day, you know, it was puppy thought, you know, and there's this puppy on the end of the leash, you know, and he's going, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, you know. Well, that's the way most people in the United States live.
And I have another parable that it goes right along with that. Here's a cartoon. It shows a cat sitting in the corner of a room, staring at the corner. And then in the bubble that shows what the cat is thinking is a picture of a cat sitting in a corner, staring at the corner. The title is Catland. And that's the other half of the people that are thinking that.
Yeah, right. Although my approach to all of this also has slightly heretical approaches in that I remember the two cats sitting in the corner of the room, and the entire room is full of mice, and all the mice are all organized in ranks and rows, and they're all standing there looking at the cats, and the one cat says to the other, God, they got organized, we may have to negotiate. Well, but that's exactly what the government cannot permit. If the people of the United States recognize that they have a common interest with everybody else in this country based upon the fact that they are debtors. I don't give a damn who you sleep with. I don't give a damn, you know, whether you're short, tall, black, white. I don't care what your plumbing is. I don't care what your, you know, personal God might be, if any. You have a common interest called survival. And if survival is not the most important issue for you, then basically you might as well be a puppy, because you're just going to be out there and you're going to be roadkill. You're going to run in front of the first truck that comes down the road because you have never learned a thing. And the problem that the government has is making sure we all stay puppies.
Well, if I understand what you're getting at with the Supreme Court and with the government head of the executive branch, that it won't then be necessary for them to have a formal announcement that the Bill of Rights has been suspended.
Oh, God, no. Oh, God, no.
Is that right?
Oh, heavens, no. Please remember, the people went into the gas chamber with a bar of soap. It was a shower. Please remember, you do not tell the frog what you're doing to him, because that would upset the frog. You know, you don't tell people that you're about to murder them. You look at what's going on in this country, if it's not genocide, what's going on in the world. That's what we started out with, the whole thing with the oil field fires in Kuwait. It was the U.S. that set them off. It was the United States that was arming Iraq and Iran through the entire 80s. I mean, we were arming, manipulating both sides. We were providing quote-unquote intelligence to Iran, to Iraq. We have material on Ollie North meeting with Iranians talking about how the U.S. is going to help Iran overthrow Saddam Hussein. At the same time, we're working with the Iraqis to kill as many Iranians as possible and providing the poison gas, the missile technology. We're providing tow missiles to the Iranians, while in fact through South Africa we're shipping arms to Iraq to have the tow missiles fired at them. I mean, we're talking about a government that is so evil, so lethal, so mendacious, so fundamentally corrupt, that we make every archetype of evil in human history synthesized look like a pack of amateurs.
Yes, because now we have the writers and the advertising and TV and all this that
helicopters.
Package it.
Very well done. Technologically, very good.
Oh, yeah, listen, you gotta give Goebbels credit for inventing the big lie, but you see, the people who turn it into a retail consumer product, you know, are the people who really took the fundamental concept and made it a real market item. I mean, did you happen to catch the NPR program on censorship and the Middle East war?
Oh, yeah.
Cokie Roberts, the moderator. You know who her daddy was?
Yes. Hail Bob.
Hale Boggs. What commission was he on?
E.L. Boggs, who disappeared in Alaska,
The very same. He
that they
was
could
on-
never find.
He was a member of the Warren Commission. And he just before, you know, it was a 160-mile flight in Alaska, and it was a FAA flight plan filed, clear weather. They still haven't found the plane. Just before his plane disappeared, he had talked to a reporter about the need to reopen the Kennedy assassination case because, in fact, they'd been lied to.
Are we talking about the same country that, who says that the government says that they can, they have satellites so sophisticated now they can read license plate numbers?
I want a refund.
I'm serious.
No, I'm serious. Either we have just been ripped off for $8 trillion because the garbage doesn't work, or the garbage does work and they're lying. Take your choice. They can either find the plane or I want a refund. Well, they don't want to give me a refund and they want me to believe it works.
I think both stick.
What, we deserve a refund and it does work?
No, some of the stuff works some of the time, and
Some of the time it
some
doesn't.
stuff doesn't work.
It
Well-
depends if they want it to work, I imagine.
I would say that there is selective efficiency. Although it's kind of interesting, Ramsey Clark must be having some effect because he is now being trashed in the New York Times, and he's being trashed by John Judas, who is the editor of In These
That's not
Times.
his actual name, is it? No, you're kidding.
Judis.
Oh, Judas. Oh, spelled that way. That would be too much.
Well, I tell
I
you,
just
it's a
automatically
name for
flashed
you.
the other way.
Yeah, I know, I mean, but that's the way it is, you know, I mean, it's getting, when you come to the end of the millennia, you know, the name freaks, you know, pig out.
That's too much. It's actually the guy's name.
Where was he trashing Ramsey Clark? In the New Republic, which is now a espionage conduit.
Who's trashing about?
Oh, well, for instance, you know who one of Ramsey Clark's clients is? Lyndon LaRouche.
No.
Yes. On the silly proposition, according to Clark, that even a nutcase deserves a legal defense.
This is mad speak.
Well, but I'm just telling you that, well, if you want the actual fact is, Lyndon LaRouche should be put against the wall, not just locked up for credit card fraud, because he is a complete megalomaniac and a government espionage operative who has been screwing the people of this country since he infiltrated the SWP under the brilliant pseudonym of Lynn Marcus.
Are they one and the same?
Yeah, Lynn Marcus is Lyndon LaRouche.
No.
You didn't know that?
No.
Oh, well, but when the deal was cut between the SWP and the Federales about, you know, because they got a $250,000 cash settlement from the U.S. government.
Right.
Well, you know, that amounted to $1 per wiretap, black bag job, mail cover, and agent planted.
Lynn Marcus and Lyndon LaRouche
Are the
one and
same person.
Are you sure of this?
Absolutely positive.
Was the guy a fink all along?
Yes. But the deal they finally cut a deal, and the SWP did not require the U.S. government to name who the 2,000 plus infiltrators were by name.
You mean somebody in the SWP didn't figure it out?
The last I read in the SWP, the explanation for why Lynn Marcus left the SWP to found the new labor committee, whatever it was, and he's now gone on with the Schiller Institute and the, oh Christ, he's now publishing a thing called the New Federalist, and he has the Executive Intelligence Review, which is a large part of the footnotes for Barbara Honecker in October Surprise, which...
Well, why are the anti-Bush administration then, if that's the case? I mean, they're...
Listen, I don't have answers to a lot of these questions. I just raise the connections and show you the cast of characters. This is a play we're at. We're trying to figure it out together.
Was Lynn Marcus, AKA Lyndon LaRouche, a government think at that time?
That's my reference.
Or did he simply tumble?
No, I think
Later.
he's been an agent since day one, but that's my personal opinion.
Okay.
Was LaRouche, was he in the Workers' World Party too?
The workers which?
Workers' World Party?
Boy, I'm not sure on that one. I mean, it's kind of, do you ever see Monty Python's The Life of Brian?
Yeah.
You remember the Palestinian Front for Liberation, Liberation Front for Palestine, and the Palestine Liberation Front, and and they were all fighting each other, while they were, here's the Roman legionnaires standing there, and they're all, hacking and cutting each other, and they're all supposedly trying to overthrow the Roman occupation. I mean, you do know that they stole that from Mediterranean Cafe in Berkeley circa 1968. I mean, they sat in there with a tape recorder and recorded all these nutcakes in the Med on Telegraph Avenue discussing how they were going to overthrow the government, and then they just transposed it to, I mean, literally, I swear some of those conversations I had heard before in Berkeley. I mean, it was the same kind of hysterical, infantile, ahistorical nonsense. So, I don't know. He could have been a member of 28 different outfits.
Lynn Marcus and Lyndon LaRouche are one and the same.
According to the latest official groupthink in SWP, the reason he left is he couldn't deal with feminism. Listen, that's their explanation, not mine. I read it in their paper. They said he couldn't deal with feminism because he was a chauvinist pig, and that's why he had to leave. Never occurred to them he'd been an agent since day one. They're too damn dumb to figure that out. Either that or, as is usual, half the people who didn't leave are still agents. You got to remember, J. Edgar Hoover had absolute control of CPUSA by the time he died in '72 because his agents had seniority. Not only did they have seniority, they paid their dues on time. If it hadn't been for FBI member dues paying, the CP would have gone under. You just stop and think about it. It's obvious. While he was writing Masters of Deceit, he was in charge.